2014 is a decisive year for Indian politics. Many see this as a year that will reshape Indian democracy and challenge conventional politics. But is this really a watershed moment in India's politics? Is this a country in transition or a mere passing phase? Indian polity on crossroads and its impact on the future of our destinies is what we will discuss and debate with Swaminathan Iyer, N.K. Singh and Deepankar Gupta right here on this show. Gentlemen, such a pleasure to be with you. My first question is very simple. Do you think 2013 has laid the ground for politics to be reshaped in 2014? Swami, let's have the first word with you.
Well, first it's an election year. Everything really is going to be about what is the outcome of that election. I see three broad possible scenarios. Number one scenario, that there is a real Modi wave. He gets 200 to 220 seats, forms a coalition that is stable with a few partners, gives him scope for actually exercising his own muscle and bringing about the kind of discipline which he claims he can bring about in New Delhi. Scenario number two, the BJP only wins about 160 seats. It may form a coalition with a very, very ramshackle one. The coalition partners will dictate to the Prime Minister. The coalition partners may not even accept Modi as the chief. They may ask for somebody else who is less controversial. Not such a good scenario. Scenario number three, if the BJP falls even short of 160, I can see a possibility of a third front government supported from outside by the BJP. To some extent, there will be echoes of the third front government we had in 1996 to 98. That again would be a relatively unstable government, probably last a year or two. That's probably the kind of scenario the Congress party is hoping for. I don't think it's the scenario that India Incorporated is hoping for. But those, broadly speaking, are the three scenarios. As of now, I think all three have an equal chance. Much depends, I think, on the performance of the Aadmi party. The BJP is riding on this anti-incumbent wave. People are angry about corruption, angry about inflation. It really reminds me of that same kind of anger in the 1970s during the JP movement and in the 1980s during the Vishwanath Pratap Singh movement. And that same kind of anger can produce very, very topsy-turvy results. So if the Aadmi party gets its act together and encashes on this anger, it might well get 20 to 40 seats. If that happens, I mean, it would really make a serious dent in Mr. Modi's ambitions. We will have to wait and see in the next 5 months how fast the Aadmi party organizes. But let's face it, the real game changer in the recent state elections was not the BJP victories in what used to be its traditional strongholds anyway. It was the emergence of the Aadmi party as a spoiler. And whether that can be scaled up to large cities is, I think, the big question. An interesting statistic, India has 53 cities with more than 1 million population. Those are all fertile areas for a party like the Aadmi, which needs small compact areas where lots of volunteers can fan out and reach everybody. So let's wait and watch. It's going to be extremely interesting. I think the one thing we can say conclusively is Congress to do badly, but beyond that, we have these three scenarios.
Mr. Singh, if I may come to you, you've been on both sides of the government, first within the government and then, of course, as a member of parliament. Let me just ask you this question very frankly. The emergence of the Aadmi party, many people believe, is really a watershed moment in our democracy. Here comes a party with no electoral background, wins 28-odd seats, raises funds on the grounds. Do you think elections 2014 or do you think politics in 2014 will see a replica of that across India? Maybe not the Aadmi party, but outputs like that. I mean, what stops a Meena Sanyal from congregating? A confluence of forces like those. Mr. Singh?
Well, you know, there are a couple of comments I have on the three scenarios which Swami presented. One of the things is that we could perhaps be committing an error in oversimplifying the conclusions from the recently concluded state elections. First, I think that it was clearly more of an anti-Congress sentiment than necessarily a strong pro-BJP sentiment, because I think there is a strong anti-Congress undercurrent on which I agree with Swami. But the fact remains that the choice was only between BJP and the Congress, except in Delhi, where of course Aadmi came into the picture. I mean, the BJP hasn't confronted regional parties Naveen Patnaik, Mamta, Nitish, Mulayam, Mayawati, Jayalalitha, TRS. So I think that, one must be mindful when we draw an all-India picture on the role and importance of regional parties, which of course you can in some ways club together as a third front or a third alternative. So this is the first thing. Second, I think that the fact that the Aam Aadmi Party came up in such a dramatic way, when people were just giving it 4 or 5 seats, suggests not only the deep antipathy and to some extent a degree of people's annoyance with the two mainstream parties to opt for something which was new, something which was unknown, something which is yet to be known. Because I think that where I have a slight variation on Swami's scenario is that, when Mr. Arvind Kejriwal begins to run the government in Delhi, comes face to face with the real problems of being able to have a credible governance, the extent to which he will have the spare time and ability to replicate the Aam Aadmi phenomena in the other urban conglomerates is yet to be seen.
That's a valid point, and I want to take that point across to Professor Gupta. We've seen the emergence of Aam Aadmi Party. We've seen that electoral politics in India is going through a shift. But Professor Gupta, would you agree with me if I were to presume, and if I were to put this argument before you, that all along politics has been dominated by either the Congress or the BJP in the last few decades? Here comes an alternative. I'm not saying an Aam Aadmi Party, but is the Indian voter across the spectrum really looking for another alternate? He's perhaps disgusted with politicians.
I think they are. I mean, the big boys have been in politics for a long time and have muddied the waters. I think there is a cry across the country for a better civic governance, and that is what is being reflected in the Aam Aadmi Party, and the sentiments behind that party should not be sneezed at. I think it's very, very important that urban agglomerates across the country are becoming very sensitive to and partial to Aam Aadmi Party like political organizations. As Swami said, urban India is very important. In the last census alone, in the last 10 years, 18 new million plus cities were added, and about 70 new million towns were added. Now this shows that urban India and rural India, the divide we talked about so glibly in the past, we have to really jettison that stuff. Urban and rural India are holding hands, walking together, and in fact there's so much of urban and rural India, so much of rural and urban India. And people want a change. The old ghosts have died. Old cleavage politics no longer works that well. The cry you hear around you, whether you're upper class or lower class or middle class, urban or rural, is better civic performance by governments, which means, first and foremost, less corruption, second, better delivery. And I think that the time has come for governments to sort of sit up and take notice of it. And old political parties, they learn very slowly, of course, but they will have to understand that, cracked though the crystal ball may be, something new is happening on the horizon. It may take a while. I can see that there's certain degree of skepticism regarding Arvind Kejriwal's performance in the future. But the fact of the matter is that this is an idea, this is a political formation whose time has well come. And it's about people like us, it's about people like us now to take the initiative and see what we can do. I do believe that old parties, like old ghosts, must be set to rest. And the new emergence, the new politics of civic, demand for civic governance is very important. And I think this is what Aam Aadmi Party is all about. True, it may not do very well in terms of delivery right now. True, it has many things against it. And I feel that some of the problems they'll face are going to be pretty insurmountable. But look at it this way. The BJP, when it won the elections in the last round, it was the party that won the elections, not so much Modi who won the elections.
If I may bring this to you, because the discourse is all about transparency, it seems. That seems to be the new normal. Nothing stopped a BJP from forming the government if it was not the emergence of the Aam Aadmi Party. There is this certain amount of emphasis on transparency. No longer horse trading can happen. But let me put out a counter-argument to you, and that counter-argument is fractured mandate. Aam Aadmi Party won against the Congress. It put the Congress down, and it still has to form a government on external support of the Congress party. Are we entering an era where the coalition is going to to get unholier by the day. There will be compromises that will be made. Swami?
There will certainly be more coalitions of a more complex nature. Hopefully they will not be messier and dirtier. Hopefully they will be somewhat cleaner. Messier, yes. Cleaner, hopefully. Within this, we have to see the difference between making all kinds of idealistic statements when you are out of power and dealing with the actual practicalities when you are in power, that there are a limited amount of funds and you can't engage in all kinds of giveaways that you might have done in an election platform. These are the realities every party has to grapple with. I'm afraid in a democracy, there seems to be a competition in telling lies during an election campaign. I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. All of it can't be done. And then if you are able to do a certain amount of it, actually I think voters don't demand too much. It can go through. One thing I will say, it is utterly remarkable that in the past, when people used to be grabbing for power, here you had a situation where none of the three parties actually wanted power, all saying, "Pehle aap, pehle aap." This is an unprecedented situation and frankly to me, a hopeful situation. Infinitely better than the earlier one when there was horse trading going on all over the place. If the Aam Aadmi Party succeeds, I see no reason why some other rival attempt should not also start. I mean, Arvind Kejriwal does not have a monopoly in the market in cleanliness or in demanding anti-corruption movements. It can be done by somebody else too. So as far as I can see, I think the days of the all India parties dominating politics may gradually be fading. We may be getting to a new era where increasingly we are going to face very complex coalitions of regional and smaller parties. And yes, it will mean messier coalitions, but hopefully cleaner ones too.
All right, messier but cleaner. That's an oxymoron, but we'll stick with that. So, Mr. Singh, I can see you smiling, and which is why my next question to you, I want to take this debate forward. I want to talk about crony capitalism because UPA 2 was all about multi-billion-dollar scams, and that has perhaps really propelled the public anger. The question really is that how is changing political dynamics in the country going to impact the India Inc. and Indian political nexus? Crony capitalism, when you talk about, has a lot to do with the confluence there. Is that equation going to change as well?
Well, I think that the equation is bound to come under increasing pressure because embedded in this concept of crony capitalism is really the need for electoral reforms. I think that's an area on which there has been little NGO movement. That's an area which is deeply connected with seeking transparency and seeking early passage of a whole host of anti-corruption bills and legislations. Because I find that unless electoral reforms, and by that I mean a more credible method of the funding and the political needs of the electoral campaign is met in a credible manner, no other electoral reform would be able to succeed in a manner which would be acceptable. So I think that unless we address ourselves to electoral reforms, this Aam Aadmi experiment and the experiment of this making a deep dent on crony capitalism may have a very limited life. I want to make one more comment. I think that a comment was made by Swami, which I entirely agree with, that the real problem will arise for Mr. Kejriwal from tomorrow, when he begins to grapple with the paucity of resources in terms of the multiplicity of promises which have been made, some of which may not be quite practical in terms of giving 700 liters of water, assured supply of 700 liters of water, or for instance, an audit of the electricity tariff designed really to basically cut electricity tariff in a very, very significant way. These will be the difficulties that when election rhetoric begins to get translated into actual implementation, I hope that the disappointment of the electorate, which put so much faith and hope and invested confidence, does not really receive a rude shock. And that would arrest the pace at which the Aam Aadmi kind of experiment can be replicated on a pan-India basis.
Let's just forget about the Aam Aadmi just now and talk about the Khas Aadmi or the people who seem to be rent seekers. And Professor Gupta, my question is directed to you. There's been a lot said about rent seekers, both from the Congress and the BJP. Arbitrary allocation of natural resources like spectrum and coal were really the reasons behind the multi-billion-dollar scams that we refer to. Do you think in some sense, you cannot take away the folly from the government in 2013 or UPA's second term, but do you think in some sense the cleanup act has begun and the ground has been laid for more transparency to come in 2014, no matter who forms the government next year?
I think you're right, because, UPA 2 had become quite reckless, really. Riding on the popularity of UPA 1 and then the way it came to power, it just felt that it was infallible, and that's why it made a mistake. Auctioning natural resources, good idea, but all auctioning is not a good idea. Some things cannot be auctioned. You can't auction sand, for example. So you have to be careful what you want to auction and what you don't want to auction. And in some areas, you might deem the public interest to be very important, and therefore, when you go on to the auction block, this must be made absolutely clear and transparent. So auctioning, yes, but auctioning must also, in many cases, be tempered by other considerations. That's the first thing. Now that we have come to the crescendo of corruption, I think it will be very difficult for the new party, wherever, the BJP or the Congress or the Aadmi, to carry on the old-fashioned way. They'll have to show demonstrable ways by which they are cleaning up their act. All this time we thought that money and violence are the natural cohorts of politics. At least the Aadmi party, even though it may have a limited stay, even though it may have all kinds of problems facing it tomorrow, has at least demonstrated that politics and violence don't always go together. Politics and money don't always need to go together. It is not as if it's like gravity and law of nature. They can be contested and pushed back. This is, I think, one of the biggest lessons of this particular election in 2013, a lesson that should not be lost. All this time, most political parties threw money around and resorted to all kinds of violent maneuvers. And good people of the country thought that, well, politics is not our cup of tea, we better stay away. Now I think many ordinary people, straightforward people, good people say, well, we too can do politics if Kejriwal can do politics.
If you actually see the voter turnout across the state assembly polls that have taken place in 2013, it's been reasonably high, especially in a city like Delhi, which did not go out there and vote, over a 70% voter turnout. Are we also going to see a shift in voter mandates? People want to be a part of the electoral process. People are willing to stand there, queue up, cast their ballot, which wasn't really the case earlier. People were only tweeting, they weren't voting. Are you going to see more people also get into the voter community, Swami?
I think that's happening. I need to add, there is probably a technical issue here. Apparently, earlier on, the Election Commission was quite quick to enroll new voters, but rather slow in eliminating dead voters and other voters who had left. So because of that, it appeared that the turnout was low when it actually wasn't that low. So partly the cleaning up of the electoral rolls is one reason why it appears that the voter turnout was higher. But over and above that, I do think that there is a new excitement. I do think that there's a feeling. I mean, we have two people who are claiming that we are going to be agents of great change. One is Narendra Modi, an agent of change within the existing framework. The other is Kejriwal, an agent of change outside the framework. Both have brought a new kind of excitement, which I think will increase the vote share, the vote turnout. There is a feeling that, something is happening, something can be done. I have to add, I have been through the JP movement, I have been through the VP Singh movement. I was part of that VP Singh movement as editor of Financial Express. How we celebrated when Rajiv Gandhi was voted out. And yet at the end of it all, nothing happened. So at the end of it all, yes, I see this new enthusiasm, the same enthusiasm that ejected Indira Gandhi in the 70s and Rajiv Gandhi in the 1980s. But even if that happens, we are seeing this larger turnout. But more important is, what will be the outcome? The one reason for hope, I think, is that both the JP and the VP Singh movements were just recombinations of opposition parties. There weren't actually any new faces. This time there are some new faces. Let us see whether that makes a difference.
All right. I want to put this across to Mr. N.K. Singh here. Swami and Professor Gupta are essentially referring to externality of politics, getting in newer elements, getting in fresh blood, getting in fresh ideas. It is not just a recombination of existing political forces as we know them. Would you agree this change is really happening, and do you believe this change is going to happen across India? I mean, a UP and a Bihar have essentially voted along caste lines mostly. Do you think those equations will also change, Mr. Singh?
Well, I think that certainly I agree with Swami that quite apart from the technical reasons which he mentioned, in terms of the consciousness itself, excitement, wanting to cast your ballot is something which we will see that will deepen in the course of the coming months and hopefully will reflect itself also in the 2014 elections. I also agree that people's quest and expectations of better life quality will increasingly make the election, not only of 2014, but elections beyond that, less and less identity-centric, and more in terms of demanding better life quality, living up to electoral promises, guaranteeing greater transparency in public life, and becoming increasingly much more demanding. And I think that a more participatory form of democracy, if I may use that expression, which the Aadmi tends to have really ushered into Delhi, is a phenomena which will and is capable of being replicated on an all-India basis. But I still remain somewhat skeptical, since time is short, of how much and how quickly the Aadmi experiment, assuming it succeeds in Delhi in the coming few months and there isn't really a backlash or a disappointment. I want to be optimistic there, but I'm somewhat doubtful on how quickly they can replicate this to other parts of India and being able to organize the election campaign, the funding and so on as effectively as the Aadmi Party has done. So I think that, let me say that I remain optimistic, but with a degree of caution that we must not too prematurely come to the conclusion that we have come to the cusp of change and we see far-reaching changes taking place too soon.
But Professor Gupta, I'm going to pose this to you in my last round, that like everybody says, there is this sense of fear. Is this a real transition or is this a passing phase? No matter who comes to head the government in 2014, will we perhaps see a repeat of 1989 when VP Singh came in, or the 70s when JP movement happened and then threw up an alternate to the Congress party? In the end, is the fear there in your mind that politicians will come back to claim politics, despite the cusp of change that we've all referred to?
Of course, that might always happen. It's very difficult to predict in politics, as you know. However, there's something I must draw your attention to, and that is this, that Aadmi Party is talking about, the needs of the citizen. And you will have noticed that all the other major parties, too, are not playing their old games of identity politics, as mentioned earlier, caste, religion, and the rest of it. Even Akhilesh Yadav didn't talk about caste war. Badals didn't talk about Panthik party and Panthik politics. Modi is not talking about Hindu versus Muslim. In fact, unfortunately, the Congress seems to be the only one that's harping on the Muslim issue. But all across the board, you'll find that the old norms of political mobilization are undergoing a transition. And I think this is a very, very welcome step. Aadmi Party is probably the cutting edge of it, but it is not alone. I think other parties too are metamorphosing, and it is this transformation that we must pay attention to if we want to analyze what will happen in the future, and the future is right around the corner.
The future is right around the corner. That's a very optimistic note to end this fruitful discussion. Now, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Two things very certain. The reference and the frequency of reference to AAP really means Indian politics has perhaps come of age. We are at the cusp of a change. Will this cleanliness sustain is really the big question. It's been a pleasure being with you on Quality at Crossroads in 2014.